Well, the other big story unfolding right here at home, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is set to deliver the budget speech 3.0 today in Parliament. And this is a third attempt at tabling the Fiscal Policy Framework for 2025 after two failed starts and a mounting economic crisis. SABC News senior reporter Samkele Maseko is standing by to give us an update. Samkele, good morning. An early start and, of course, great anticipation. But if we look at your conversation earlier with Tsepo Mungwai talking about the politicization of this budget, given how things have changed, can we, however, look at today's budget and talk about the consensus that there will be given the looming crisis if we do not get this through?
Indeed, Sakina. So the South African political tectonic plates have shifted, and on an economic basis, we are looking at seeing this third attempt by the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, tabling his third attempt at a budget and fiscal framework of the country here today, particularly noting that there seems to be some sort of synergy between the two biggest parties in the government of national unity, that would be the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. There have been a number of presentations on the table on how the Minister of Finance will close that budget deficit of about 75 billion rands that is there. There were proposals of increasing the wealth tax, introducing the corporate tax as well, and also capacitating the South African Revenue Services SARS to collect more taxes to close that particular deficit. The MK party has said that it looks as if that particular deficit, noting the President Ramaphosa, he may run to the IMF and to the World Bank saying that they will oppose that particular view and rather have the government going to the BRICS Bank and the BRICS countries to borrow that particular money for the deficit that would be there within the budget. There have been introduction of austerity measures that Cosatu, the SACP, the EFF, the MK, they are saying they are against those particular austerity measures, particularly when it comes to the cutting of social spending. The President, the Minister of Finance, has clearly come out and said that there will be no cutting of social programs of government, particularly to vulnerable South Africans. But the million-dollar question is, where will those funds of the budget deficit shortfall, where will it come from? But I'm not alone. I am with Matthew Parks, who comes from the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Cosatu, the labor movement. Mr. Parks, where are we going to get that particular shortfall deficit? What are the proposals that are coming forth from the trade union movement on how the Minister of Finance can close that particular deficit without introducing VAT that has fallen away, without going to the World Bank, without going to the IMF? How can we expect and anticipate that your former member will speak about when it comes to that particular deficit?
Good morning. Thanks for having us. Look, I think we must avoid going to the World Bank and the IMF. We need to get out of avoid going to the debt trap. We think there are simple ways to collect the revenue. Number one is to give the South African Revenue Service the resources it needs to improve tax compliance of owed taxes to the state. There's a debtors book of about 800 billion rand. Go after that. It doesn't make sense to bring new taxes upon the working class who are struggling to cope with the cost of living, and we allow a third of society not to pay tax. SARS assurance can improve tax compliance. We should give them more support, especially on customs fraud or on tax evasion by high wealth individuals who owe a lot of money, high wealth companies and so forth. Of course, we also think there is a need to reduce some of the tax loopholes upon the wealthy through income tax, through company tax, inheritance, estate duties and so forth, but also especially on luxury goods and customs fraud. There's a huge amount of money on the illicit trade, tobacco and alcohol, which is not paying taxes. SARS is saying they've got a plan. We need to give them the resources. But of course, we also have got to deal with the fundamental obstacles of growing the economy. When a fiscal pressure point, because the economy has been stumbling at 1% for the past 15 years. So unless we grow the economy, unless we help companies sell their products, unless we help reduce unemployment, we're going to remain cutting and chopping and changing here, tinkering the size. And the fundamental point is take us from 1% to 3%. So that means ensuring we have reliable and affordable electricity, making sure transit is fully operational because that unlocks mining, manufacturing, agricultural sectors. Make sure metro rail is fully operational, that boosts the urban economy. We've got to fix the dysfunctional municipalities. We've got to resource public services because all of those help unlock economic growth. But whilst you do that and you give support through businesses, we need to have a much more aggressive industrial financing program to support SMEs, to support industrial sectors, to support export industries. But also when you do that, you've also got to expand public employment programs, give a pathway to employment for young people, to enter the labour market, to earn a salary, to get the skills and experience to find work. So we've got to do many things simultaneously, but we think if we're aggressive enough, we can turn things around.
Particularly noting what the Minister of Finance has said, Enoch Godongwana, he is particularly against wealth taxes, against an introduction of corporate tax or increase in corporate tax within the country. How do you then navigate a situation where your own Minister of Finance, who's got a Labour background, by the way, is essentially saying you can't overburden business sector, particularly noting that will have a negative impact when it comes to foreign direct investments into the country. If you were to increase the wealth tax, if you were to increase corporate tax, it would hurt the current economic base of the country and foreign direct investments coming in. How do you then navigate that particular point where a minister is refusing to go that particular direction?
Well, I think the point is we must have the debate. And I think part of the good thing, the budget adventures this year, 3 budgets in a few months, we need to have these debates about what are our expenditure priorities, what must we have, what can we live without, but also what are the acceptable and unacceptable revenue options to generate the funds. We think that we need to make sure the tax regime is progressive, that it's biased towards the poor, make sure those who earn the least pay the least, make sure we adjust, for example, personal income tax brackets for working class earners, but also make sure the wealthy pay their fair share. And often the tax evasion is by wealthy individuals who have got fancy lawyers, fancy accountants, know how to put money offshore in trusts, etc. Which is what SARS has been saying. Let's give them the resources to invest in AI, the infrastructure to go after these individuals. But we also need to look at the tax regime to reduce the loopholes for the wealthy to exploit it. There is already what you have is elements of a wealth tax, in income tax, in company tax, inheritance, etc. Do you think there is some space to adjust here and there? The difficulty, though, is that won't really generate the amount of money we need to collect for the state. So for us, the number one priority is really to capacitate SARS, to go after the 800 billion rand of money owed to the state, and to really say, can we improve tax compliance from 64% to 70% over the next 2 years? Each additional 1% of tax compliance is an extra 20 billion rand of owed money to the state. So that's a far larger amount of money we can generate. Tinkering we must do on the side, but it's going to give you 2 or 3 billion rand. So I think for us it's really about give SARS all the support they need to make sure all the money that's owed to the state is collected.
Mr. Parks, on the last question, President Ramaphosa is in Washington, United States of America. Later today, he will be meeting with his counterpart, President Donald Trump. As the Labour movement, Cosatu, what are you anticipating from that particular meeting? Also noting that the South African landlord, Johan Rupert, is supposedly also instrumental in securing that particular meeting. And he may also be in the United States of America, in Washington, at this point in time. What are you anticipating from that particular meeting?
So we're happy that the President has gone there. It's an important task he's fulfilling. In fact, we've been working as Cosatu with government over the past 3 years on stabilizing and resetting our relationship with the US. It's the largest economy in the world. It's our second largest trading partner. American companies investing here is about 600. And South African companies who export to the US collectively employ 500,000 South African workers. So we can't afford instability in our relationship. We think the President, we need to have low expectations. Allow him to kind of agree with the US President on a process to reset our relations, task officials in both governments to work on the geopolitical irritants, the domestic irritants, the trade irritants on both sides, make sure we have a reset that can be done over the next 3 months. It must respect both countries' sovereignty, must respect our transformation journey, which is constitutionally sanctioned. But we're convinced we can do so in a way which is positive, which is win-win. It must benefit South African workers who work in the motor manufacturing, the agricultural sectors. It must benefit US workers too, because you need a relationship which is not based upon charity. That's not sustainable. It must be mutually beneficial, which the current trade relationship is actually beneficial. So we think the President can do it. We must also have a frank discussion as a country, because the amount of fake news, hate speech on social media, nonsensical talk about a white genocide, we need to address those issues because it does a lot of damage to the country, and we can't address those issues. But also fundamentally we must look at our internal fault lines of the 43% unemployment, the inequality which is largely defined by race. And simultaneously, whilst we support the President and he's doing God's work fixing the relation with the US, we must also invest in our relationship with the European Union, with China, with Japan, with Brazil, with other major trading economies. And most importantly, we must also focus on our relationship with Africa, because that's where our future lies, especially on trade and investment.
that relationship with China is very interesting, Mr. Parks. We'll definitely pick it up in the coming weeks with you, because this union's T-shirts that you are wearing, the South African Clothing and Textile Workers Union, their base, their members have been disseminated in the Eastern Cape. When you go to Kimbaza, which had the textile hub in the Eastern Cape. So it is a very interesting relationships, knowing that China has basically disseminated South Africa's manufacturing sector, particularly when it comes to the South African Clothing and Textile Workers Union. But the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, has a mammoth task ahead of him, noting that today, Gwede Mantashe will be chairing that particular cabinet meeting, noting that he is a socialist and communist, and particularly is against some of the austerity measures that may be introduced or discussed upon in this particular third attempt of a budget by the Minister of Finance. It is going to be interesting how these particular former socialists, former unionists and communists steer the ship with the absence of the President, the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, as well, and also the leader of the second biggest political party in the Government of National Unity, John Steenhuisen, with President Ramaphosa in the all-important meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House in the Oval Office in the United States of America. But the budget, if it is not passed, it will see the collapse of government like we have seen in Germany as well. But with the president seemingly relaxed and on official business in the United States of America, it seems as if it's all systems go for this third attempt of a budget to pass through in Parliament.
Well, thank you so much, Samkele Maseko, senior reporter there for SABC, out in Cape Town as we prepare for Budget 3.0, and that will be live here on SABC News.